Hello and welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I'm Matthew Lucas.
And we post every week, so don't forget to subscribe and press the alert button so that you'll be reminded every week when our videos come up.
Indeed, indeed. Now, Stephen, we are underneath the arbour, as they say, out in your courtyard. Yep. What's going on?
Well, we're talking about an interesting group of plants that come from all over the world.
Yes.
And they can be collectively called tropical blueberries. Right round the equator, up in the mountains generally, so they're not actually in the tropical climates per se, they're in temperate climates, come a whole range.
So they're not tropical blueberries at all?
They come from tropical countries.
Yes.
I don't know how to put this, but anyhow, I think people will understand. They come from the mountains, so there's the mountains of New Guinea, the mountains of northern Queensland, the mountains of South America, so the Andes and things in sort of northern Peru, Colombia, Paraguay.
And are they all related?
They are all in the Ericaceae family, which puts them in the giant family in which rhododendrons, azaleas, and the classical cold climate blueberries belong. Yeah. They are all basically edible, although some might be quite bland. Okay. And they're seriously collectible because they are great container plants. Many of them grow in the forks of trees in the wild, so they're actually epiphytic. So they don't get particularly big root systems, so you can have them in a smallish pot or in a hanging basket, and they can flourish and grow and do all of the things that they should do. Yes. They have seriously good foliage. Most of them have stunningly beautiful bell-shaped flowers. Right. And they're nearly all bird pollinated, so tubular flowers, particularly in the reds and pinks, are bird attractants. So if you want to attract honey-eating birds into your garden, they work. Yes. And I guess, of course, for the permaculturalists out there, so if there are people out there that actually want to grow only things you can eat, how many edible plants do you know that you could grow in a hanging basket on a shady veranda?
I can't think of any. Yeah. But the obvious question is, are they related to, I don't know what it is, the blueberry of commerce? What's that called? Yes,
they're in the same family. They're in different genera. I mean, they're not all the tropical blueberries don't belong to one genus of plants.
We are in your courtyard. Why?
Because behind us here is one of the species of what I would class as tropical blueberries. Yes. Agapetes serpens, which comes from the Himalayas. So it comes from the sort of mountains of sort of India and Thailand and, you know, so all through that area. Yeah. And it's quite a largish genus in the group. And it is also one of the more regularly available genera.
Well, that is a good point. Okay, we should then have a closer look at this one first.
Right, what a good idea.
All right, Stephen, I have oft admired these in your garden to the point where I have actually bought one.
Yes, it's working.
Tell us everything, as they say in the classics.
All right, well, this plant obviously isn't in bloom. In the spring, it will be a mass of little red tubular flowers.
And we have flowers from both of our plants, which will drop into the footage.
But the plant itself pays its way visually all year round. You've got this beautiful sort of arching, drooping habit. Yes. So it's a very elegant weeping plant in a pot.
Have we mentioned its name?
Agapetes serpens.
Agapetes serpens. Yes. Serpens, what does that refer to?
Sort of snake-like, sort of.
I was going to say. But, well, I guess. Yes.
It's sinuously snake-like. There you go. So to be able to look out on a plant in a pot, I always believe any plant in a pot should be interesting all year round in one form or another. If you have something that flowers for 3 weeks and is a green blob the rest of the year, it's
out of the pool.
Yeah, it's not going to make any impression. So the Agapetes keeps me entertained all year. I get the flowers, I get the berries, I also get the beautiful weeping habit. The new growth is a lovely coppery colour, so the new growth in the spring is also very pretty. It has amazing lignotubers at the base.
What's a lignotuber, Mr. Ryan? Why is it not a caudex? Well, tell the people.
They are sort of the same thing, I've decided.
The same thing.
Yeah, it's just another terminology for basically the same thing. I tend to use lignotuber. Caudex tends to be more around true succulent plants and things. You talk about the caudex of your different euphorbias or whatever.
And very fashionable now, caudex plants.
Yeah. So these could be fashionable for their lignotuber.
And it is remarkable. We'll show you. It looks like a whole pile of sweet potatoes.
Oh, it does rather. And the thing, because they're epiphytic in the wild, or at least a lot of them are, they have a very small root system. They live off their lignotubers. They don't need to be overly heavily watered. They just don't like to dry right out. And they can stay in the tiniest of pots and grow into the most massive of plants.
Because, I mean, comparatively, your pots are not huge, but this well, in the pot, this is 6 feet tall.
So, yeah, so over 2 metres.
Over 2 metres tall.
Yep.
And it's really, really beautiful. So does this have berries that are edible?
Yes, yes. Yes, I haven't actually eaten
them. Have you eaten them?
Not off this species, but I have off one of the other ones that we'll be looking at in this particular segment. Agapetes hosseana, I've eaten the fruit off that quite regularly. I don't get a lot of fruit on this one, but hosseana tends to fruit quite well. So there you go. So I have eaten the berries and they're perfectly edible, not overly exciting, I have to say. They're succulent, but not overly strong in flavour.
Well, there you go. But I guess, you know, nor is a potato, really, is it? So my question about Agapetes serpens is basic conditions. So hardiness, sun requirements. Right. We've said that it's not that water needy.
No.
What about light? You've got a lot of light now.
Yes. Well, it doesn't mind a bit of sunlight, and most of the Agapetes will cope with it. But they're very, very good in light shade.
Light shade.
So permanent light shade is fantastic for the whole group. That goes for most of the other tropical blueberries as well in the other genera. Hardiness is very various depending on which one you're talking about.
But this one,
Agapetes serpens, is comparatively hardy. It will cope with a couple of degrees of frost quite easily, in fact with aplomb. So they will cope a little bit with cold, but some of the others that we'll discuss are actually far more prone to be frostbitten. So it will vary depending on the species. I mean, you can't necessarily expect one from Ecuador or Colombia necessarily to have the hardiness of the foothills of the Himalayan species like this one.
And I must say that mine in a pot has gone gangbusters and flowered beautifully. Yours didn't this season.
You look smug. We have had a weird season with some of the tropical blueberries this year. Some of them haven't flowered particularly well. But then if you really analyse your plants in the garden, you will find most things will have their good seasons.
They'll
and their
wax
off
and wane.
So, so it knew we wanted to film it, so it decided not to flower terribly
well. We can't
well.
always shine. Yeah. So it's a fascinating group of plants, which I had never heard of till I met you, and you have got an amazing collection. And I've actually been buying them off you. So I think we should go. And what we actually did was we filmed these segments during the previous year when each of the plants was doing its thing in flower. So why don't we go and have a look at the first one?
What a good idea.
Another of your tropical blueberries, Stephen.
Yes. This particular one is a Macleania rupestris.
Yes.
I'm not sure who Mr. or Mrs. McLean was, but anyhow. Now this one comes from Venezuela, Bolivia and Costa Rica, and it grows in the mountains, so it's comparatively cold tolerant, even though it's a tropical blueberry, but it doesn't like serious frost. And this flowers for months, and you get these amazing
They're very waxy. They're just stunning. They're like an incredible wax flower.
Yeah, and the little white tips, which would allude to them being bird pollinated. Red flowers and tubular flowers are often bird pollinated.
Have you seen birds on this?
I haven't noticed, but I'm quite sure they probably do. And of course they are true blueberries, and they do in fact produce blueberries.
Are they edible?
Well, why don't you try one?
Oh my God, is it toxic? Am I going to die?
I doubt it. Tastes
it tastes like a blueberry.
Yeah, funnily enough. So there you go. So they are quite edible. And
my tiny mind is exploding, Stephen.
So this is the sort of plant that you can sell to well-heeled permaculturalists because it is edible, but it's not easy to get. It's in fact very rare, and so it's always going to have a high price tag, but it is edible. So, you know, this could be the dessert at a Michelin 5-star restaurant, perhaps?
It could, but let's talk about rarities. So you have a large collection. Is this one sort of available-ish?
As far as I know, it's not available in Australia commercially. I'm starting to grow it, so I will have it available.
Is it tricky? Have you found it tricky to propagate?
No, it's actually surprisingly easy to propagate. Okay. But many of these plants are languishing in the sort of depths of the horticultural glitterati, but not in the general population. So you probably will struggle to buy this anywhere in the world. But it's a group of plants that we should be engaging with. They make fantastic pot, or as in the case of this one, hanging basket subjects.
Well, I have one from you which is loving life in a pot in Melbourne in a hanging basket.
And because they're often epiphytes in the wild, their root system is quite compact.
I was going to ask, given the sort of slightly sort of trailing habit, where would it be growing in its native environment?
It would probably be hanging out of a tree somewhere.
Right, like an orchid? Or...
Yeah, very, very much that sort of thing. And because it's often an epiphyte in the wild, its root system system's quite small.
Right.
And so you can have a very big Macleania in a very small container.
Loving that. And you get gentle frosts here. What's its tolerance?
Look, it'd go down to just a little under 0 Celsius, but not much.
Yep.
I sometimes put these away in the greenhouse for the winter. It's not a heated greenhouse or anything, but I sometimes do that if I'm a little nervous, especially if it's a new species that I haven't had for very long.
Yep.
But this one hung outside all winter, albeit that we didn't get a lot of heavy frost this year.
And what about its flowering season? Do you think, is it sporadic or a specific time?
No, a lot of things that come from the tropics don't have a specific flowering period because they tend not to have cold and hot seasons.
Difference, yeah.
So sometimes it's only a matter of how much moisture you get at a certain time. So it could be dry or wet season.
Or whenever the plant feels like.
Yeah, and it's been in flower now easily 4 months.
Wow, okay. It's such a striking flower too. It is a plant destined to have a future, I feel, in the horticultural trade because it's so decorative.
It is, it's beautiful, and it flowers young, it fruits young. I doubt we'll ever have lots of fruit unless you've got lots of Macleanias that you can get them from.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's a fabulous plant, and I think the tropical, neotropical, in fact the term tropical worries me because they do come from up in the mountains, so they're not strictly tropical plants.
And that does suggest a certain type of care, and this clearly is not the tropics.
No, but they love to be under the shade house and where they get plenty of moisture, but they've got good drainage because they're in a container that drains sharply. And I just have to feed them sort of once a year or so with a slow release fertilizer.
There you go. How hard is that? All right, well, I'm looking forward to the next one.
All right, fantastic. And now we're off to New Guinea, believe it or not.
Look at those. They are such extraordinary waxy flowers.
Yes, it's one of the New Guinean high altitude but tropical blueberries. It's a genus called Dimorthanthera, which means various anthers, which are the male sexual organs that are inside the flower.
Okay.
So some are shorter, some are longer, so Dimorthanthera. And it's a genus of about 79 species, most of which come from Papua New Guinea and Irian Jaya, but some of the outlying islands and things also have species. And this particular one is Dimorthanthera alpina, which of course means from up in the Alps.
Alpine mountain, yes, yes, yes.
And it grows at an altitude of about 3,200 metres, so it comes from an area which is comparatively cold, and this plant has sat outside all winter here under a shade cloth in a hanging basket and has flourished.
Now, in its natural conditions, are they epiphytic, or where would you find them growing in the wild?
All right, they can be known to be epiphytic and also terrestrial, and they're a scandent shrub, so they'll sort of throw limbs up through something and hang over another plant, and then the next one might go up and hang over another part of the other plant. So it will slowly work its way up through some sort of supporting shrub or tree, and I believe in the wild they can be 10 metres long.
Oh my goodness, that's large.
They can be very big.
So I bought one of these from you, and it's doing very well, Stephen. But I did notice, so mine also had these fantastic new shoots, but unlike you, under shade cloth, mine is under polycarbonate sheeting, so it's protected and a little shady, but it's not shade, and it can create a bit of a greenhouse environment. And I noticed that the very tips of those have literally just burnt.
Yeah, and that's not unlikely, because when you think about it, in its natural habitat, it grows amongst the foliage and canopy of other plants. It's up in the high alpine areas where it's often misty and not huge amounts of sunlight coming down on them.
Right.
So they get plenty of light, but they don't get a lot of direct sunlight. So it is a plant that requires that sort of semi-shaded, high light but no direct sunlight type conditions.
So what I've now done is hung it under a tree. It's in a basket like yours, and it seems quite happy there.
Yeah, so much more like its natural habitat.
Dappled light and still a bit of protection.
Yeah. So this will in fact produce, like all of its relatives, edible berries. They'll be a sort of a purpley black colour, which is quite appropriate for a blueberry relative.
And we tried one. What was the other one that we tried?
Oh yes, the Macleania, which comes from northern South America.
Yeah.
And we both had a go at that. I've eaten berries off this Dimorthanthera. They're quite juicy. They're slightly sweet. They're a bit like they're a bit like some commercial blueberries, which I don't find overly flavoursome. But certainly a beautiful plant. If it never fruited, I don't know that I would care, because it is just such a handsome and beautiful flower.
It is.
And I have to say though, it will be a challenge for anybody worldwide probably to acquire this plant.
Really? Why?
So, well, it's just quite rare. It's really only ever seen in collections in botanic gardens. I am one of the few commercial nursery people in the world that is probably growing small quantities of this plant for sale.
Wow.
It's a fantastic plant, and obviously would be something a collector would want, but it's beautiful enough that I could see, you know, the average punter would come in and go, my goodness, that's beautiful, I want one for my own garden.
Well, that's what happened to me, and it's very low maintenance. All we have to do is anything in the basket is make sure it doesn't dry out.
Well, exactly.
But so given its altitude, given its New Guinea altitude though, you do get mild frost here. How hardy have you found it to be?
Look, I found it to be reasonably hardy, although having said that, last winter was the first winter that I left it outdoors for the whole of the winter, and we had a comparatively mild winter with only 1 or 2 very, very minor frosts.
Yep.
So if I'm at all nervous about these plants, I tend to take them into my igloo for the winter. It's not heated.
I was going to say, igloo sounds counterproductive, but...
Well, that's what we call those sort of metal structures with plastic structures.
This is where, which we featured in our cutting epic.
Yes, exactly.
The Stephen Ryan Secrets of Taking Great Cuttings, which we'll link below.
Yes. So this can live in my igloo during the winter, and that's fine. It's much more protected. But it will cope with comparatively low temperatures, but I don't think it would want direct frost on it.
No. It is so incredible. The flowers are amazing, very waxy. I mean, you know, the Hoya is commonly called wax flower, but this really is a waxy flower.
Oh yes, and I've got a couple of other species of it, at least they're purportedly other species of Dimorthanthera, which I haven't as yet flowered, so we don't know what species they are, but what excitement to have something that I'm growing on that may or may not turn out to be a Dimorthanthera. It will certainly turn out to be something in the tropical blueberry group nonetheless.
And if it's not named, can you name it?
I'd be very surprised if it hasn't been named.
Right.
I mean, most of them are known in the wild now, but who knows? You know, it could be Dimorthanthera ryanii. Wouldn't that be fantastic?
It would. Well, this one is stunning.
It is beautiful.
Stephen, another tropical blueberry.
The group is huge, and this is our one and only Australian representative of the group.
Yep.
And this is a plant that's now known as Paphia meiniana. It was for a long time included with the Agapetes, which we're also discussing in this particular video.
Yep.
Now, this comes from the mountains of northern Queensland. It grows in the same part of the world where our only Australian rhododendrons grow, so they grow together on Mount Bartley Frere, Mount Finnegan, some of those higher peaks in northern Queensland. And this is a rambly plant that'll often grow in the crevices of rocks or wander itself up through the branches of low trees. And it's never...
Sounds like a dreamy existence, just saying.
Yeah, well, it sort of is. But I've yet to find a really heavy flowering clone.
Right.
So they're fairly shy flowering. This particular one is a soft pink. You can get it from a sort of a cherry red right through to a pure white. And I'm, of course, obviously waiting to get all the other colours as well. A friend has got a white, so I'm now on the hunt. So hopefully I will have a range of different Paphias in my collection in due course. And the only thing I'd say about it otherwise is I did have one in the garden at home that had worked its way up through the bark of a Eucalyptus obliqua, the messmate, which sort of has loosish bark. And it got up to around about 4 metres up the side of the tree.
Goodness.
So they can get quite large. Unfortunately, mine had a dry spell that I wasn't paying attention to and I lost it.
Stephen Ryan.
But, you know, I'll have another crack at it at some point or another. But they can get quite large, so given enough space, but can also grow perfectly happy in a basket.
So that was self-supporting?
Yeah, it just sort of pushed itself through the loose bark that was still hanging onto the tree.
So not a clinger, it just...
Yeah, it just
lent.
Yeah, and I didn't help it at all. It just found its own way. I planted it at the base of the tree and off it went.
How interesting. But can I just say though, even altitude in North Queensland is not the same as altitude in Victoria where we are. That's climatically very different.
Yeah.
So this is obviously... Has it remembered an ice age, Stephen? And I've learned that from you.
I'm not sure whether it has or not, but it has a certain amount of cold hardiness, but like the vast majority of this group, they will only cope with a degree or two of frost. So in many climates that our viewers live in, they will find that they'd need to grow this as an indoor plant or a conservatory plant. So just a light, mild frost is about all they'll manage.
And given it's Australia, I mean, is it in cultivation widely or not?
No. No, even the Australian plant growers rarely grow Paphia, which is sort of sad. They should be, because it makes a fabulous container plant, and obviously they should be selling it in all the colours.
There we go. Well, we'll look forward to, and then we look forward to your hybrids.
Oh God, yes. That's the next thing, is to try and produce a floriferous form, perhaps of a new colour, but who knows?
There you go. Watch this space. Is this another neotropical blueberry, Mr. Ryan?
Well done, Mr. Lucas. I'm now taking you to Venezuela.
Venezuela.
And also Costa Rica, Bolivia, Peru, all that northern part of South America. And this is a genus called Disterigma.
Disterigma?
Yes. Now this one is Disterigma alaternoides, and it's one of about 40 recognised species in the genus. And yes, it is another tropical blueberry relative. I am growing this for its foliage as much as anything, which is probably a good thing because I've yet to flower it.
Really?
Yeah, and I got it from a friend who also hasn't flowered it yet, and I am not altogether sure that there may be an issue with altitude or climatic conditions under which it needs to flower.
So where is, you said Venezuela, but what's its altitude?
Its altitude, it goes up to about 3,500 metres above sea level.
Right.
It can come down to below 2,000 metres above sea level, but it's still quite high up in the mountains. And this is a sprawly shrub again, often growing as an epiphyte in the wild. I've seen images of the flowers, and I have to say I'm not overly upset that I haven't seen it bloom, because they're tiny little white lily of the valley-like flowers.
Yeah.
But it would be fun to flower it, only so that it would then get its blueberries, so I could taste the berries.
But, so this is the new foliage with this pinky hue.
Yes, it's gorgeous. I think it's as pretty as any flower. It's got a wonderful cascading form, which makes it ideal for hanging baskets or for trailing out over the edge of a pot.
Yeah.
And like most of its relatives, it has a small fibrous root system, so it doesn't require or need a particularly big pot. So you just need to stop it from drying out, and perhaps once a year just give it a feed with a slow-release fertiliser of some form or another.
And the leaves are quite waxy too.
They are. They're very pretty little leaves, and in fact people comment on it without flowers anyway, so it obviously has ornamental value even if I don't ever see a flower.
But alas, to most of our viewers,
again, virtually impossible to get. I got this actually sort of indirectly through the Botanic Gardens in Melbourne, and they got it from a collector who collected it in the wild with a collecting trip to South America. I am not altogether sure that there's anywhere in the world that it is a commonly grown plant other than where it comes from in the wild, where apparently the fruit are sometimes seen for sale in markets.
Well, there you go. Well, your collection is quite extraordinary of these types of plants.
I've become obsessed by them.
Obsessions.
I can't help myself. And I'm hoping that this will be one of those obsessions that not only I will get a lot of pleasure out of, but I'm hoping it's the sort of group of plants that people will engage with, because I think there's a lot of potential here for the permaculturalist who wants to grow something that's edible, for somebody who's got a shade house and they need interesting plants to put in hanging baskets or pots in a shade house, and just for people who want something interesting and different in their garden.
Which is me, because I also have one of these from you, Stephen.
You're chasing me along. You're trying to keep up with me.
But it's stunning. It's a really unusual thing. Okay, well, I'm loving this whole series about this plant, so thank you.
That's a pleasure. Now we're back in the Himalayas of all places, and this is a genus of plants that are known by the botanical name of Agapetes. Now, Agapetes means beloved. So how's that for a botanical name? And this particular one is Agapetes hosseana, sometimes sold in Australia as red elf, but I don't think that name has any legal standing, so to speak. And it gets these gorgeous little red tubular flowers with a green and black tip to them. It grows into an arching shrub, so again would make a good hanging basket subject. As you can see with this one, it can be grown in the open ground, certainly makes a good pot plant, and again in the wild it's often an epiphytic plant. Now, the interesting thing about this blueberry, and most of the Agapetes for that matter, they don't have black berries. So this one has pure white berries with pink spots on it. So imagine a dish of those coming to the table. So it is a really interesting and different fruit. You can eat these. So like all of the tropical blueberries, they're edible, but they don't look like a blueberry. Now, the Agapetes, because they come from the foothills of the Himalayas, actually in general are a bit more cold hardy than some of the other tropical and neotropical blueberries, so they will go down to quite low temperatures. Again, they don't like a lot of direct frost on them, but otherwise they're comparatively hardy plants. So in sort of climates where you'd grow the large flowered indica azaleas, those sorts of things outside, there's no reason why you couldn't grow some of these Agapetes. And the other thing that Agapetes do that is really interesting from my perspective, although obviously it's not overly ornamental, but they have lignotubers. So they get these big swollen bases to the plant, and sometimes they can be quite massive on an old plant. They store moisture in them, so they don't need to be overly watered, although they don't like to dry out. And the lignotubers normally sit above the ground, so they become part of the feature of the plant. So people who collect plants with Cordex type bases would probably be interested in Agapetes. Like most of the neotropical and tropical blueberries, they don't want a lot of direct sunlight, but the Agapetes will actually cope with a little more light than some of the other genera in this sort of group of plants. So I would put them where they get perhaps a little bit of morning sun at most, or filtered light through most of the day. Certainly not in dark shade, because that will stop them from flowering well, and they'll probably grow a bit spindly.
Aren't they fascinating? Do you think you're a blueberry pioneer in this country? Seriously, a serious question. Are many people growing them?
No, they're not that easy to get. The vast majority of people don't actually even know that they really exist.
No, I didn't.
It always comes as a shock to people when I say, oh, that's a blueberry, and they go, what?
And also, you know, most garden plants, you're always told, don't eat the fruit.
Yes.
Because it looks delicious, so it looks purple or red, and you want to eat it. And so it's sort of imbued in your mind, don't eat garden plant berries. But these things, and we tried a few of them, they taste like blueberries.
Yeah, well, exactly.
They are blueberries.
Should. But yes, it does raise a whole sort of spectrum of things. I mean, part of the joy for me is the collecting side of things, of course. So for me, because they're so hard to get, and yet there's a huge group of them.
And they're not tricky.
No, they're not tricky to grow, but they're hard to get. And so finding a new one to add to my collection is always something that is a red letter day, I have to say. So if I find a new one, I mean, I actually managed to find the name for one that I'd got as an unnamed species some time ago, and that's just come into my collection as a named cultivar now, or named species, which is fantastic.
Well, talking of which then, how do you go, because it's all about responsible collecting, and Australia has very strict biosecurity laws about importing plants, so where do you find these, Mr. Ryan?
So far, all of the species and forms I have got in my collection have come out of other collections already in the country.
Right.
So I haven't gone to the effort of trying to import. If I was going to try and import them, I'd probably see if I could source seed, which is much easier to bring through.
Right.
But if it was something that somebody had offered me in America or somewhere else to add to my collection, I would probably be prepared to go down the route of getting a certificate, then sending out for the plant, making sure it had its photosanitary certificate, bringing it into Australia, taking it through quarantine, and then bringing it out the other end and not making any money out of it. So that's probably the way it would go.
That is a palaver with a capital P.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, so far then you have managed to enrich your collection locally, and they are amazing. How could we possibly top tropical blueberries? Perhaps with cream or ice cream.
Yes, that's right. Yes, I would say cream, but that's about the only thing I'd top them with, I think.
But in terms of the horticulturalists, what could we be doing next week?
Well, maybe something practical, who knows? You know, we always find something to talk about, and that is the great thing about gardening. We never, ever know it all.
So if you do want to know it all, you'll need to hit subscribe to find out what we're doing next week. And in the meantime, we look forward to seeing you next week. And until then, Stephen.
Yes, goodbye all.
Goodbye.